In the farthest corner of the mountains lies a place most maps refuse to mark, a valley of endless fog and silence. Its lone farmhouse leans like a wounded soldier, watching the tree line with windows like yellowed eyes. The locals speak of the Blackwood bloodline, 8 generations of men who never mixed with outsiders, never broke bread with strangers, never shared their secrets. But the rumors go further. They talk of deep howls echoing from within the house long after midnight, of shapes moving on all fours, of men whose eyes glint like predators when the moon is full. It all began with Elias Blackwood, the first patriarch, who survived a winter blizzard by bringing 3 wild hounds into his bed. Now, after 8 generations, the Blackwood line has become something entirely its own, something that blurs the line between man and beast. Tonight, we follow the path into Kine Valley to uncover what lies behind those locked doors, and whether anyone who enters will ever walk out the same. If you're already leaning forward, hit that like button, subscribe for more journeys into the darkest corners of forgotten history, and share this with a brother who loves a good mystery. It keeps us exploring and bringing you stories no one else dares to tell. The road to Kine Valley was barely a scar across the wilderness, winding through pines that leaned together like conspirators. Wind hissed through the branches, carrying the smell of damp earth and distant rain. An old truck rattled along the path, coughing exhaust. Inside, Dr. Morgan Hayes unfolded a creased map, tracing the thin line leading into the forgotten valley. His boots were braced against the floor to steady himself. Leo Chen sat beside him, camera bag wedged between his knees, fingers tapping nervously against the worn dashboard. Each bump in the road seemed to shake the air, filling the cab with tense silence. The driver, Earl, was a grizzled man with a jaw like stone and hands that gripped the wheel as if holding back the valley itself. He hadn't spoken in miles, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Finally, he braked near a rusted signpost, leaning like a drunk soldier. "This is as far as I go," he said flatly. "Nobody drives past this point after sundown, not unless they're looking to disappear." Morgan checked the sun lowering behind the ridgeline. "We're close?" Earl spat into the dust, then nodded. "Close enough to smell them if the wind's right. Close enough that the trees know you're here." Leo adjusted his glasses, uneasy. "Because of the Blackwoods?" Earl's silence was heavier than words. At last, he muttered, "Because of what they've become. Men who stayed too long apart stopped being like other men." He killed the engine and tossed their packs into the dirt. "I'll wait 1 hour. Then I drive back to town. If you're not here by dark, you walk. If you're lucky." Morgan paid him quickly and shouldered his gear. The forest pressed close on either side, its quiet unnatural. Even the birds seemed to have gone mute. Leo glanced around as if expecting to see eyes. They followed the track toward Millbrook, the last settlement before the valley. Weathered buildings leaned against each other like tired boxers, and a few men smoking on the porch of the diner fell silent as they approached. Inside, conversation died completely. The man behind the counter slid 2 mugs toward them without being asked. His beard was streaked with gray, his gaze measuring. "Strangers don't just wander through here. What's your business?" Morgan laid out his university ID. "Documenting isolated communities for cultural research. We're particularly interested in the Blackwood bloodline. 8 generations of men surviving here almost completely apart from the outside world." A man at the far end of the counter snorted. "Surviving? You mean mutating. Those Blackwoods aren't like other men anymore. Walk hunched, eyes shining like animals. They don't talk much, just watch you." Leo leaned forward. "You've seen them?" The man nodded grimly. "Every spring and every fall, 2 of them come to town for supplies. They pay in cash. Never stay longer than needed. Leave before sundown." Morgan jotted notes. "Anyone willing to take us to their land?" Silence thickened until a young man in a corner booth stood. Jason Collins, broad-shouldered, face shadowed by stubble, spoke. 200. I'll take you. The bearded man frowned. Jason, your father would break your jaw if he knew. Jason shrugged. Then he won't know. But we leave now. Back before nightfall. Morgan agreed instantly, eager not to lose daylight. Jason's truck was newer, but coated in dust. He drove fast, tires skidding on loose gravel as the road climbed higher into the hills. The forest grew denser, shutting out more of the fading light. So, what's the real story? Morgan asked, raising his voice over the rattle of the truck. Jason kept his eyes ahead. They're private, but too much time alone changes men. Sometimes it makes them something else. Leo's fingers tightened on his camera. What do you mean? Jason didn't answer immediately. I mean, he said finally, I've hunted near that land. Heard things that weren't wolves, weren't men. Things that still keep me awake. They reached the fork, where the track narrowed into a tunnel of trees. Jason braked. Their house is a mile down. I'll wait here an hour. If you're not back, I leave. Morgan nodded thanks and stepped out. The air was colder here, carrying a musky smell. Leo adjusted his pack nervously. This is insane, he muttered, but he followed Morgan down the narrowing trail. Branches scraped their shoulders, and every sound seemed magnified. The crack of twigs under their boots, the rush of wind through the needles overhead. Somewhere distant, something padded softly through the undergrowth. You hear that? Leo whispered. Morgan nodded but didn't slow. Probably a deer, he said, though his voice betrayed doubt. Keep moving. We need to see this before the light's gone. The trees thinned suddenly, revealing a clearing. There it stood, the Blackwood farmhouse, 3 stories of patched wood and stone, leaning yet solid. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and several outbuildings stood like silent sentries. Leo raised his camera. Feels like we stepped back 100 years, he breathed. Before he could click the shutter, the front door creaked open. A tall figure stepped onto the porch, moving with a strange rolling gait. He stopped at the steps, his face hidden in shadow. You're trespassing, he said, voice deep as the earth. State your business or keep walking. Morgan stepped forward, professional smile masking his unease. I'm Dr. Morgan Hayes, he said evenly. This is my colleague Leo Chen. We're studying long isolated communities. Your family's history is unique. We'd be honored if you'd allow us to document it. The man descended the steps into the last of the sunlight. His face was long, jaw too heavy, brow casting deep shadows. But it was his eyes, golden, catching the light, that froze Morgan. You wish to study my bloodline? The man asked, each word deliberate. We want to understand it, Morgan replied quickly. How you've kept your way of life through 8 generations without losing it. Silence stretched before the man nodded. I am Abraham Blackwood, patriarch here. You may photograph the land, but not my men without their leave. You will respect this place if you wish to stay. Leo lowered his camera. Understood. Abraham's mouth stretched into something between a grin and a baring of teeth. Night comes soon. Come inside, meet the men, then decide if you wish to stay past dark. Morgan hesitated, remembering Earl's warning, but nodded. This was the moment they'd come for. He and Leo crossed the clearing, their boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, following Abraham's looming shadow. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke, old timber, and something musky that clung to the back of the throat. The entryway opened to a vast common room dominated by a blackened stone hearth. The walls were lined with antlers, snarling wolf heads, and sepia photographs of Blackwood patriarchs. Their gazes followed the intruders, generations of stern faces watching from gilt frames like silent sentinels. Abraham gestured toward heavy chairs near the fire. "Sit," he rumbled. They obeyed, setting down their gear. The fire hissed, casting long shadows that made the room feel like the inside of a beast's ribcage. More men entered, some broad, some gaunt, some with jaws that jutted too far forward, their amber eyes catching the light. They did not speak, only stood, their presence filling the room. "You have questions," Abraham said, lowering himself into a creaking chair. "Ask." Morgan leaned forward. "How has your bloodline held this land so long without conflict?" Abraham's gaze burned steady. "Because no one dares to take it." Leo wet his lips. "The locals say they hear howls, that you move like wolves." Abraham's mouth twitched. "Stories. But every story has a spine. Blackwood blood remembers the old ways better than most." The fire popped. Morgan's pen scratched across paper. "Can we meet the rest of your men?" Abraham nodded. "At supper, every Blackwood under this roof will sit. You'll see what we are when we gather." A younger man appeared silently, his frame lean, shoulders slightly hunched. His amber eyes shone like his father's. "Jacob," Abraham said, "my son." Jacob nodded once, then vanished back into the hall, steps barely audible. Jacob returned moments later with steaming mugs. He set them down wordlessly. The smell was metallic, strong. Leo sniffed cautiously, but drank. The taste was wild, earthy, leaving warmth that spread strangely through his chest. Abraham studied them with an unblinking stare. "Tonight you will see truth," he said quietly. "But truth is not gentle. Truth has teeth." The fire popped again, almost like something growling low in its throat. Morgan's pulse quickened despite himself. "We're ready," he said, though he wasn't sure. Leo shifted in his seat, camera still hanging from his neck, but for the first time he didn't raise it to take a picture. Night had fully fallen when Abraham rose from his chair and motioned toward the hallway. "Come," he said. "If you want to understand us, you must begin at the beginning." Morgan and Leo followed him through the dim corridor, their boots echoing against the wood. Lanterns burned low along the walls, casting swaying shadows that made every mounted antler look like reaching claws. They stopped at a door reinforced with iron straps. Abraham withdrew a massive key from around his neck and turned it in the lock. The hinges groaned as the door opened, revealing a study beyond. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and smoke. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with journals bound in cracked leather. A single desk sat near the window, its surface marked by deep scratches. "This room holds the record of 8 generations," Abraham said. "Every Blackwood patriarch kept his own account. What we became, what we lost, what we gained." His eyes glinted as he gestured toward the shelves. Morgan stepped forward, scanning the spines. Each bore a number and a name burned into the leather. First generation, Elias Blackwood. Second generation, Thomas Blackwood. The line continued until the most recent bore Abraham's name. Abraham pulled the first volume from the shelf and set it on the desk with reverence. "Read," he said. Morgan carefully opened it. The ink was faded, but the writing precise, the words marching like soldiers. "November 1872, Morgan read aloud. "Blizzard caught me returning from town. Would have perished but for 3 great hounds that found me in a cave. We shared warmth. They did not leave when the storm cleared." Leo leaned closer, fascinated. The next entry read, "December 1872. The hounds sleep in my bed now. Their presence eases my thoughts. I wake with their breath in my ears and no longer dream of war." Morgan turned more pages. "January 1873. Found myself growling at a trader who came to the door. The sound startled us both. The hounds approved. They stood beside me until he left." Abraham watched silently, expression unreadable. Morgan flipped forward. August, 1873. My jaw aches. My teeth feel longer. I see better at night. My son laughs and calls me Wolfman. Perhaps he is right. Leo exhaled slowly. He was changing. Abraham's voice was calm. He was awakening. The hounds passed something to him. Blood, spirit, call it what you like. Elias welcomed it. The others feared it. Morgan read on. October 1875. My wife begged me to send the hounds away. I refused. She left for her brother's farm. My son stayed. He sleeps beside me now. We are a pack. Leo frowned slightly at the word. Abraham noticed. A pack is stronger than a family, he said. Bloodlines bound by choice, by bond, by shared instinct. Elias understood that before the rest of the world. Morgan's fingers traced the page. January 1880. My son shows the signs early. His eyes shine in the firelight. He moves silently through the house. The hounds accept him as one of their own. He turned another page. March 1883. The townsmen came with torches. They said we were cursed. We drove them off. No man will drive a Blackwood from his own land while breath remains. Leo's stomach twisted. He fought them? Abraham's expression hardened. He defended his kin. Would you not fight for yours? From that day, no outsider crossed this land without Blackwood permission, and few dared again. Morgan read on. May 1885. The original hounds have died. Their sons remain. We keep their line as we keep ours. Blackwood men must never sleep alone, lest the bond grow weak. Leo looked up sharply. He believed sleeping with them was essential. Abraham nodded. The sharing of breath keeps the bond alive. My men still sleep beside our hounds. That is how the blood remembers. Morgan turned to the final pages. December 1887. My jaw is longer now, my nails thicker. The townsmen call me monster. Let them. My line will endure. My son will take a wife soon. Abraham's eyes glinted dangerously. And so the pact was sealed. Elias chose the path. The bloodline grew stronger. Outsiders called it blasphemy. We called it survival. His hand closed the book with finality. Leo's pen hovered over his notebook. This is more than folklore, he said quietly. This is deliberate transformation. Generational change guided by ritual. Abraham's mouth curved slightly. Now you begin to understand. Morgan glanced at the other journals. Do they all describe the same progression? Abraham nodded. Each generation records its own growth. Some resist, some embrace. But the blood never forgets. He replaced the journal on the shelf and turned toward the door. Enough reading for tonight. You will meet my sons soon. Words are one thing, seeing is another. Morgan hesitated, then asked, Why trust us with this? Abraham's gaze fixed on him, glowing faintly in the lamplight. Because you came this far. Men who reach my door have earned at least a glimpse. The hallway felt colder as they left the study. Jacob waited at the end, his head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as though catching their scent. Supper's ready, he said. All are gathered. They followed him toward the dining hall. The air grew warmer, thicker, carrying the smell of roasted meat. The murmur of low voices echoed from ahead, more than Morgan had expected under one roof. The door opened onto a room dominated by a massive oak table. Around it sat Blackwood men of every age, gray-bearded elders, hulking middle-aged hunters, and lanky youths whose jaws had only begun to sharpen. Abraham took his place at the head. Morgan and Leo were seated midway down, surrounded by Blackwoods. The firelight revealed their faces clearly now, every one marked by that same predatory intensity. Platters were brought out by Jacob and another broad-shouldered youth. Venison, barely cooked, glistened red in the lantern glow. The men tore into it with hands and teeth, eating with an animal efficiency that silenced the room. Morgan forced himself to chew, recording every detail. The meat was metallic, strong, almost sweet. Leo's hand shook slightly as he set down his fork, choosing instead to simply watch the men feed. Abraham broke the silence. You wanted to know how we live? This is how. We hunt, we share, we strengthen the bond. This is what Elias began. This is what we continue. One of the younger men grinned, his teeth catching the light. Outsiders say we're cursed, he said, but they fear what they don't understand. We are not cursed. We are chosen. Morgan's pen scratched faster. Chosen for what? The youth's grin widened. To be more than men. A ripple of agreement moved around the table. Abraham's voice rumbled, final. To be what comes next. The fire roared as if in answer. Morgan felt sweat bead at his temple, though the chill of the mountain night still seeped through the window panes. Leo swallowed hard and glanced toward the door. Abraham noticed and smiled faintly. Do not fear, he said. The night is young. The real story begins after dark. His words hung in the air like a promise, or a threat. Morning came gray and heavy, the valley drowned in mist that clung to the trees like cobwebs. Morgan woke to the distant baying of hounds and the smell of wet earth seeping through the walls. Leo sat on the edge of his cot, lacing his boots. I barely slept, he muttered. I kept hearing footsteps in the hallway. Morgan rubbed his eyes. Not footsteps, he said. Pause. A knock sounded at the door. Jacob entered without waiting, his amber eyes sharper than before. Abraham waits, he said simply. Guests have come to the gate. He says you should witness. Morgan grabbed his notebook and followed. The hallway was colder than before, as though the house had shifted overnight. The mounted antlers on the wall seemed to lean closer, their shadows longer. Outside, the clearing was shrouded in mist. Several Blackwood men stood near the gatepost, shoulders squared, bodies tense. Beyond them, two strangers waited, both rugged men in work coats, mud caked to their boots. Abraham stood in the center, towering over everyone. His voice carried easily. You were told not to cross this land, he said. One of the strangers shifted uneasily. We need to speak. It's important. Leo raised his camera, but Abraham lifted a hand. No pictures. The strangers nodded toward Morgan and Leo. Who are they? One asked. Abraham's expression didn't change. Witnesses. Nothing leaves here without truth. Morgan's pulse quickened as one of the strangers stepped forward. There's been killings in the hills, he said. Sheep torn apart, tracks too big for wolves. Men in town are talking. Abraham's jaw flexed. Let them talk. The stranger swallowed hard. They say it's your men. The clearing went silent except for the wind. Blackwood's shoulders tightened like bowstrings drawn to breaking point. Morgan scribbled furiously, every word feeling like history in the making. Abraham stepped closer, towering over the man. My men hunt what is theirs. No one goes hungry here. If sheep died, they were offered. The second stranger cursed under his breath. Offered? To who? Abraham's amber gaze burned. To the valley, to the pact. You wouldn't understand. His voice dropped to a growl. Take your warning and leave. The men hesitated before turning back down the trail, glancing over their shoulders as though expecting to be followed. The Blackwood stood silent until they were gone, then turned back toward the house. Leo let out a shaky breath. They're terrified of you, he said. Abraham's mouth curled slightly. Good. Fear keeps fools alive. Men who forget fear cross lines they shouldn't. His gaze lingered on Morgan. Inside, the atmosphere was charged. Blackwood men paced the hall like caged animals. The younger ones growled under their breath. Jacob appeared again, his nostrils flaring. The pack wants blood, he said quietly. Abraham placed a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. Not yet. The room stilled at his command. Tonight we gather. Tonight the choice is made. His words sent a shiver through Morgan despite the warmth. Leo finally raised his camera and snapped a single shot of Abraham standing in the doorway, framed by mist. The image would look like a king surveying his kingdom, or a warden guarding a prison. Morgan flipped through his notes. These strangers confirm what the journals suggested. The pact still lives. Leo nodded slowly. But what happens when outsiders accuse them openly? This feels like the edge of something. Abraham turned back toward them. Come, he said. There is more to see before nightfall. They followed him beyond the clearing to a trail leading deeper into the valley, where the trees grew older and thicker. The path twisted downward until they reached a ring of stones blackened by fire. Bones lay scattered within, some animal, some disturbingly large. Morgan crouched, brushing dirt away from a jawbone far bigger than a deer's. This is where Elias first called the Hounds, Abraham said. Every generation since has kept the fire burning when the moon is full. His voice held a strange reverence, as though speaking of a church. Jacob knelt, placing fresh kindling in the pit. Tonight it burns again, he said. The look he gave Morgan was unreadable, almost challenging, as if daring him to stay long enough to see it. Leo glanced at the bone pile uneasily. What happens if you don't burn it? Abraham's gaze sharpened. Then the valley hungers, and when the valley hungers, men pay the price. He let the words hang ominously. They hiked back toward the house, the mist lifting slightly. Morgan noticed claw marks etched into several trees along the path, high above their heads. Whatever made them had been massive. By the time they returned, the other Blackwood men had gathered near the porch. Their expressions were serious, eyes bright. One of them muttered, "Moon's nearly full." Another replied, "Then we hunt tonight." Morgan caught every word, his pen racing. Leo swallowed hard, his throat dry. "We should be gone before dark," he whispered. Morgan didn't answer. Part of him wanted to run, but part needed to see. Abraham's deep voice cut across the murmurs. "Inside, prepare!" The men dispersed quickly, moving with a strange unity, like wolves responding to a silent signal. Even Jacob seemed more tense, more alert, as if ready to spring. Morgan and Leo stepped back inside. The house felt different now, alive, humming with energy. Somewhere overhead came the sound of claws against wood, followed by a low, resonant growl. Leo looked at Morgan, pale. "That wasn't a dog," he said. Morgan didn't disagree. The sound had been too deep, too deliberate, too close to human. The hair on his arm stood straight. Abraham returned, carrying a lantern. "You will see supper again," he said. "But tonight it is not just a meal. Tonight you will understand the bond." His words carried weight like stone. The table was already being set when they entered the hall. This time, more Blackwood men were present than before, perhaps a dozen in total, their eyes reflecting the firelight like molten metal. The meal was silent at first, just the sound of tearing meat and cracking bone. Morgan forced himself to eat, the taste even stronger than before. Leo only pretended, pushing scraps around his plate. When the last bone was cleaned, Abraham stood. "Tonight we gather at the stones," he said. "Our guests will come. They must witness if they are to speak truth." His gaze pinned Morgan in place. Morgan nodded slowly, heart hammering. "We'll be there." Leo exhaled shakily but didn't argue. Whatever happened tonight would decide whether their journey ended as research or as a warning never written down. As the men rose from the table, Jacob's grin showed sharp teeth. "Better keep close," he said to Leo. "You don't want to get lost out there when the moon comes up." The lanterns were lit one by one, and the house glowed like a beast's belly in the dark. Somewhere beyond the trees, a long, mournful howl rose and was answered by several more. Morgan and Leo stood at the doorway, staring into the night, knowing there was no turning back. The valley had them now, and whatever awaited would not be easily forgotten. Lantern lights swayed as Morgan followed Abraham down the hall. Each step seemed to echo louder than it should, as if the house itself were listening, every timber straining to catch their movements. The air grew cooler as they descended a narrow staircase. The smell of earth thickened until it felt heavy in Morgan's chest. At the bottom waited a low wooden door, reinforced with black iron bands. Abraham unlocked it with the same key used earlier and pushed it open. A gust of stale air rushed past them, carrying the musk of hound fur and the metallic tang of dried blood. The cellar stretched deep beneath the house, supported by stone pillars slick with damp. Torches guttered in iron sconces, throwing light over cages at the far end. Shapes shifted within, breathing slow, heavy breaths. Jacob appeared beside them, holding a lantern. "They're restless tonight," he said. Morgan stepped closer, heart thudding. Inside the cages were men, or what had once been men, their jaws elongated, their nails like claws. One of them snarled, teeth flashing. Abraham's deep voice cut through the air. "Quiet." The creature obeyed instantly, lowering its head. "These are Blackwoods who crossed too far," Abraham explained. "They hunt too freely, they must be kept." Morgan scribbled, barely able to keep his hands steady. "They're still your kin?" Abraham nodded once. "Blood does not lie. When the moon is right, we run with them. Until then, they stay below." Leo's face was pale. "You keep them caged?" Jacob's amber eyes glinted. "Better caged than roaming when strangers come. The valley must be balanced." His words carried a strange gravity, as though repeating law. They moved deeper into the cellar, where shelves held skulls, hound and human side by side, polished smooth. Morgan ran a finger over one jawbone, noting how it seemed to fall between species entirely. Abraham's voice was reverent. "The house keeps memory here, every skull a story, every mark a lesson. The bloodline remembers what the town forgot. That man was never meant to stand alone." Morgan's stomach knotted, but fascination burned brighter. He filled pages with sketches of the cages, the bones, the claw marks etched into the stone pillars as though made during furious attempts to escape. A low growl rumbled from one of the cages. The sound vibrated through the stone. Jacob crouched, meeting the creature's glowing eyes. "Tonight," he whispered, and the thing stilled, as though soothed by the promise. Abraham turned back toward the stairs. "Enough! You have seen what lies below. Now you will see what lies above." They ascended, the cellar door closing behind them with a final heavy thud. Upstairs, the house felt warmer, almost oppressive. Abraham led them to a long hallway lined with doors. "Each man has his own room," he said. "But none sleeps alone. The bond must be kept." One door was ajar. Morgan glanced inside and saw a massive hound sprawled across a straw mattress, breathing deeply. A young Blackwood lay beside it, arm draped across its neck like a brother. Jacob noticed his look. "They are raised together," he said simply. "The hound chooses the boy. When the boy becomes a man, the bond cannot be broken without breaking him." His tone allowed no question. At the far end of the hallway stood a locked door carved with strange runes. Abraham paused there. "This room is only opened during the gathering," he said. "Tonight you will see it." Morgan felt the weight of the words. Something about the door seemed to hum faintly, as though whatever waited inside could sense them. Leo shifted uneasily, clearly wishing they could turn back. Abraham's voice was softer now. "No Blackwood dies unremembered. What happens tonight binds the living to the dead." His gaze flicked to Morgan's notebook. "If you write this, write carefully. Words have teeth if spoken wrong." The hall creaked underfoot as they returned to the common room. More Blackwood men had gathered, their voices low, their eyes following the strangers with quiet intensity. The air felt charged, ready to ignite. Morgan sat near the hearth, pretending calm while his pen moved furiously. He recorded everything: the smell of sweat and smoke, the gleam of firelight on sharpened teeth, the way Jacob paced like a caged predator. Leo stood near the window, peering into the clearing. "There are more men outside," he whispered. Morgan joined him and saw figures in the fog, standing still among the trees like carved totems. Abraham noticed and nodded. "Brothers from the far hills have come. The pact calls all of us to gather when the moon grows fat. No man with Blackwood blood can ignore it." The fire roared suddenly, sparks leaping toward the chimney. One of the younger men grinned. "It begins soon," he said. Morgan's pulse quickened despite himself. He was about to witness something no scholar had ever seen. Jacob returned carrying a carved horn and blew a single note that echoed through the valley. From outside came answering howls, not quite canine, not quite human, until the forest itself seemed to tremble. Abraham turned toward Morgan and Leo. "Stay close," he said. "If you stray tonight, the valley may not give you back." His words were matter of fact, but they chilled more than any threat could. The men began to file out into the night, lanterns in hand. Morgan and Leo followed, the ground slick under their boots, the air full of smoke and anticipation. The clearing seemed larger than before. At its center burned a great fire, built high, casting shadows that danced like wolves around the ring of stones. The Blackwoods formed a circle, their faces half lit, half hidden, glowing eyes catching the flames. Abraham stepped forward, holding a staff carved with symbols. "Tonight we remember," he said, his voice carrying. "Tonight we run." The words sent a shiver through Morgan. Leo gripped his arm, eyes wide. The men began to chant, low and guttural. The sound was not music, not quite speech, but something older. The fire flared higher, and somewhere far off, hounds bayed in answer. Jacob stepped into the circle, baring his teeth in a grin that seemed too wide. His shoulders rolled as though stretching. The other men watched silently, some smiling, some swaying to the rhythm. Abraham's voice rose. "Let the bond be kept. Let the blood remember." He slammed the staff into the earth, and the circle erupted in a howl so deep it shook Morgan's ribs. Leo stumbled back, nearly dropping his camera. Morgan held him steady, unable to look away as the men moved closer to the fire, their shadows stretching and warping on the ground like beasts ready to leap. When the howling stopped, silence rushed in like a wave. Abraham turned to Morgan and Leo. "You have seen the house. You have seen the blood. Tomorrow you must decide whether you leave with it." The men began to disperse, some heading into the woods, others returning to the house. Jacob lingered near the fire, staring at Morgan with eyes that glowed like embers before vanishing into the night. Morgan stood rooted in place, notebook limp in his hand. He had wanted to understand the Blackwoods. Now he realized understanding might cost more than he could pay. Leo's voice was barely a whisper. "We stay?" Morgan nodded once, though his stomach clenched. "We stay," he said. The words sealed their choice, and somewhere beyond the trees, something growled approval, as if the valley itself had heard and agreed. The moon rose heavy and golden, casting a pale glow across the clearing. Smoke from the fire spiraled upward, carrying the scent of pine and blood. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Morgan stood near the fire's edge, clutching his notebook though he had stopped writing. Every instinct screamed to run, but fascination rooted him. Leo was pale, his camera hanging forgotten against his chest. Blackwood men gathered again, more than before, filling the clearing. Their breathing sounded strange, in unison, as though one living organism occupied many bodies. Jacob stood closest to the fire, chest rising and falling rapidly. Abraham raised the carved staff and struck it against the stones. "Tonight, the pact renews," he thundered. A cheer erupted, not human in tone, more howl than shout, vibrating in Morgan's ribs like distant thunder. The men began to remove their shirts, revealing scarred torsos, muscles rippling in the firelight. Their skin gleamed with sweat despite the chill. Claw marks ran down some of their backs, old wounds healed silver. Jacob stepped into the circle, kneeling before his father. Abraham placed a hand on his head and spoke words too low for Morgan to catch. Jacob's shoulders trembled, then stilled as though accepting a burden. The others joined in a chant, a guttural rhythm that matched the crackle of the fire. The air grew hot, shimmering like heat on stone. Morgan's breath felt thick, almost difficult to draw. Leo whispered, "They're changing." Morgan said nothing. Something in Jacob's posture had shifted, his arms slightly too long, fingers curling like talons. His jaw stretched as if trying to contain something straining to escape. Abraham's voice rose again. "The blood remembers," he cried. The circle echoed him, voices merging into a single roar. The fire leapt higher, illuminating faces that no longer looked entirely human. Morgan backed up a step, heart pounding. Leo gripped his sleeve. "We shouldn't be here," he hissed. But no man blocked the path. Instead, they were being made to witness, whether they wanted to or not. Then came the sound, the first howl. Jacob threw back his head and howled at the moon, a sound too deep to belong to a man, too mournful to belong to a beast. The others joined, one after another, until the valley rang with layered howls that seemed to reach the mountains. From the forest, answering howls rose, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Shapes appeared between the trees, enormous hounds with eyes like molten gold. They padded into the clearing, silent except for the sound of their breathing. Some approached the men and pressed their heads against their legs. Morgan watched as one of the younger Blackwoods knelt and embraced a massive hound, burying his face in its ruff. The animal stood perfectly still as though acknowledging him as brother. Abraham lowered the staff. "It is time," he said. The men began to file toward the edge of the clearing, hounds following. Jacob lingered, turning back to stare directly at Morgan and Leo. "You wanted to see truth," he said. "Now follow if you dare." Then he vanished into the trees, moving with a loping stride that was no longer entirely human. Morgan hesitated only a moment before pushing Leo forward. "We have to see," he whispered. "If we leave now, we'll never understand what this is." Fear burned in his gut, but curiosity pushed harder. They followed the pack into the forest. The moonlight turned the path silver. Branches whipped at their arms, but the Blackwoods moved effortlessly, silent, almost gliding, hounds darting among them like shadows. The group reached a clearing deeper in the woods, where a ring of black stones formed a perfect circle. A smaller fire burned here, its flames blue-white, casting an eerie light over everything. Abraham stood in the center, staff raised. "The hunt begins!" he cried. The men dropped to all fours as though compelled. Their backs rippled under the skin, bones shifting, jaws elongating, fingers sprouting claws. Morgan's breath caught. Transformation was not a myth. It was happening in front of him. Some men howled, some snarled, some simply closed their eyes and let the change sweep through them like a tide. Leo staggered backward. "We need to go," he whispered. But Morgan grabbed his arm. "Not yet," he said hoarsely. "If we survive this night, the world has to know." Abraham turned toward them, his face halfway between man and beast. "Tonight you run," he said. "Run, so the valley may know your worth. If you reach the house, you live." Morgan's blood ran cold. "And if we don't?" Abraham's grin showed teeth too sharp. "Then you join the pack." He pointed toward the trees. "Run." Morgan grabbed Leo's wrist and bolted, crashing through the underbrush. Behind them came the sound of paws and claws tearing up the earth, the howls of men and hounds mingling into one terrible chorus. Branches whipped their faces as they ran. Morgan's lungs burned. Leo stumbled but kept moving. The sounds behind them grew closer, panting, snarling, the thud of something massive hitting the ground. They burst into another clearing and nearly fell into a pit. It yawned open in the earth, lined with stones and filled with bones. Some gnawed, some cracked. The smell of decay hit them like a wall. Morgan dragged Leo around the pit and back into the trees, heading uphill toward the faint glow of the house. His legs screamed, but he refused to stop. Every instinct told him stopping meant death. Something slammed into a tree beside them, shaking loose bark. A shape lunged from the shadows, one of the Blackwood men, half-changed, eyes blazing. Morgan swung his notebook like a club, barely missing him. Leo grabbed a branch and swung wildly, connecting with the attacker's shoulder. The man growled and leapt back, then vanished into the dark, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing all around them. They stumbled out of the forest just as the house came into view, lanterns glowing like watchful eyes. Jason's truck was still parked near the fork, but there was no sign of Jason himself. The porch door swung open. Jacob stood there, fully changed now, his grin wide. "You made it," he said. "Good. The hunt isn't finished yet." His words were almost a purr. Morgan's legs trembled as he climbed the porch. "What happens now?" Jacob's grin faded. "Now you decide whether you stay until morning or leave before the moon sets." His eyes glowed like coals. Inside, the fire burned higher than before. Abraham entered behind them, still half-changed, his breathing heavy. "You ran well," he said. "Better than most." The other men filed in, surrounding them with silent expectation. Morgan wiped sweat from his brow. "We did what you asked." Abraham nodded. "Yes. Now you see the choice. Witnessed men cannot go back unchanged. You must choose to keep the bond or never return." Leo swallowed hard, glancing at Morgan. The house seemed to lean closer, as though listening for their answer. Somewhere beneath their feet, the caged Blackwoods growled in unison. Abraham placed the staff before them. "Choose," he said simply. The fire crackled, the hounds outside bayed, and the night held still, waiting for the decision that would decide whether they lived or became something more. Morgan's heart pounded as he stared at the staff lying between them. The room seemed to hold its breath. Firelight painted every Blackwood face in gold and shadow, waiting, silently daring him to speak. Leo's hand twitched toward the door, but Morgan caught his arm. "We can't leave yet," he whispered. "If we run, they'll follow. If we stay, maybe we survive until dawn." Abraham's amber eyes narrowed, reading them like open books. "You hesitate," he said. "Good. Hesitation is the mark of a man who understands the weight of the pact. A fool would choose too quickly." Jacob stepped closer, crouching until his face was inches from Morgan's. "Stay," he murmured. "Run with us when the moon sets again. Learn what it means to have teeth in the dark." Leo shuddered. "And if we refuse?" Abraham's grin was slow, dangerous. "Then you leave now, and the valley remembers you as prey. Not many men live long after that choice." Morgan stood, forcing his knees to stop trembling. "We came for truth. We've seen enough to write a lifetime of it. But we are not Blackwoods." His voice shook, but did not break. Abraham's smile faded. The room went deathly quiet. Jacob's head tilted, almost animal-like. "Then you run again," he said softly. "This time, there is no finish line. Just the forest and the moon." The door swung open, cold night air flooding in. Hounds waited outside, their eyes glowing like lanterns. Morgan grabbed Leo by the arm and bolted into the darkness, boots hammering against the earth. The forest swallowed them instantly. The trees looked different now, twisted, reaching, branches clawing at their clothes. Behind them came the sound of pursuit, claws tearing earth, guttural howls, laughter that didn't sound entirely human. Morgan forced himself forward, lungs burning. Leo stumbled but recovered, driven by sheer terror. The sound behind them grew louder, closer. Shapes darted between the trees, always just out of sight. They found a narrow trail leading downhill. Roots snagged their boots, but they didn't stop. Somewhere far off, a horn blew, deep, mournful, and the howling redoubled, answering the call. Morgan's mind raced. "We can't outrun them," he gasped. "We need higher ground." He yanked Leo toward a ridge, climbing until their hands bled from gripping rocks. The sound of pursuit thinned but never stopped. They reached the ridge and found an entrance to an old tunnel half hidden by brush. Without speaking, they plunged inside. The air was cold, damp, the walls slick with age-old moisture. Their footsteps echoed, and somewhere deep in the tunnel another sound answered, the slow padding of something moving toward them. The light from the entrance faded as shadows thickened. Morgan lit a match, its glow trembling. Bones littered the floor. Deer, wolf, and something with a human skull, cracked neatly in half. The smell was coppery and thick, almost choking. Leo gagged, covering his mouth. "We can't stay in here," he hissed. But the sound behind them grew closer, claws clicking against stone. The tunnel ahead narrowed, leading only deeper into the earth. They ran again, ducking low, following the tunnel until it opened into a cavern. In its center stood a black altar of stone, marked with clawed symbols. The air thrummed as though alive. Morgan stepped closer, feeling heat radiating from the stone. "This is where the pact was sealed," he breathed. The walls were covered with scratched names: Elias, Thomas, Jacob, Abraham, generations carved into the rock. Leo pointed at a fresh carving near the bottom. 2 new spaces had been chiseled, waiting. The message was clear. 2 more names would be added before dawn. A growl echoed from the tunnel. Jacob emerged, half-changed, moving on all 4s. Behind him came 2 more Blackwoods, their amber eyes glowing. "You made it this far," Jacob said. "Good. Now run again." Morgan grabbed Leo's arm, darting toward a side passage barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. The Blackwoods followed, their claws scraping the stone, their growls filling the narrow space. They burst out into the open air on the far side of the ridge, stumbling into the night. The moon was higher now, bright enough to turn the world silver. Ahead lay the road. Jason's truck sat there, engine idling. Jason himself leaned against the hood, rifle in hand, jaw tight. "Get in!" he barked. "I've been hearing them since dusk." Morgan and Leo scrambled into the truck bed. Jason fired once into the trees, the blast echoing through the valley. Something howled in answer, then silence fell, tense and heavy. Jason floored the accelerator, tires spitting mud. The truck roared down the mountain path, every shadow a threat, every bend a trap. Behind them, the howling started again, closer than before. The truck fishtailed, but Jason kept control, grim-faced. "Don't look back," he said. Morgan couldn't help himself. He looked. Shapes ran alongside them in the dark, too fast for men, too upright for hounds. The road widened, and the valley began to fall behind them. The howls grew fainter. Only then did Jason slow, sweat shining on his forehead. "You're lucky," he said. "Most don't get out." Morgan gripped the side of the truck. "They let us go," he said, realization dawning. Jason shook his head. "No, they're just waiting. Once you've been marked, the valley never forgets." They reached Millbrook just before dawn. The diner lights were on, and a few men stood on the porch, watching silently as the truck pulled in. No one asked questions. No one needed to. Morgan climbed out, his legs shaking. He still clutched his notebook, pages soaked with sweat. Leo sat in the truck bed, staring blankly at the horizon as the sun turned the sky red. Jason lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke. "Write what you want," he said quietly. "But don't come back. Not unless you're ready to stay forever." His eyes were flat, certain. Morgan nodded. He knew Jason was right. The valley had given them a choice, and though they had escaped with their lives, something inside him already felt claimed, altered by what he had seen. Leo finally spoke, voice hoarse. "Do we tell them the truth?" Morgan looked down at his notebook, at the names, the sketches, the words. He closed it slowly. "We tell them enough to keep them away." The morning light spread across the mountains, burning off the mist. Far away, a single howl echoed, faint but unmistakable. Morgan closed his eyes and listened until it faded into silence.